This is for the guy who put in the lights. In Greenville, South Carolina.
Oops. That's all right, just leave it down there, Emily, that's a good place for it.
Oh, they're right.
Oh, that's a good place.
Lots of engineering. What you been doing this week?
Oh, just working.
You still okay with your job?
Yeah, yeah, we're picking up the pace, getting ready for the next school year, you know, making sure all the paperwork's done, so.
Whatever it is it pine or cypress or what?
I don't know, I just know it's evergreen.
Freude. Like Beethoven's ninth yesterday.
Yeah.
You singing it? We were singing it Sunday at church. Yeah, I love that song.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, John.
Hey, John.
Hi, Shasta. Are we just pick a spot, any spot? Ooh, I don't want to be on the camera.
Let's see, maybe I'll ring it again and then we'll just start.
All the important people are here.
I know.
That's the second ringing.
This is from my brother.
Come on in, folks.
Good morning.
You still in? Before Wiley.
Here we are.
I signed it for
He
her.
wrote Sarah was talking. He signed it before here. Here she came. And Thursday is.
I sit 6 feet away from you, can't I?
It's as close as far as you want. I mean, I don't feel threatened.
Couple of quick announcements.
In the last week and a half, I've had 3 negative
As we
COVID
get
tests.
started,
So I don't think I'm contagious.
there's a card going around, and it is a thank you card for Dan Stansel, who is my brother-in-law, who has fixed the lights as you came in, you might have noticed it's a lot brighter in the hall. Also, the lights the light that will shine down on Lisa as she speaks. And with the help of wait a minute.
John?
No, Joel and his brother helped get a ladder up for that, and Keith provided the ladder, and so we had a group effort. So, but this is for Dan. Dan lives in Greenville, South Carolina. He's a member of Disciples Methodist Church. Has nothing to do with us except that he likes this church and what we stand for. So we wanted to thank him. Second thing, quickly, and it looks like that Joanne has something too, but we'll see.
This is for next Sunday, so
Okay.
I'm just going to have it here and pick it up before you leave.
I know I probably tell you too much about what's in the morning paper, but I'm gonna do it again. Emily asked me to behave this morning. I told her absolutely not. That would be totally out of character. John Boyle has a column you need to read today. It is factual, it is emotional, It is urgent, and it's very well worth reading. It has to do with our gun situation. That's all I'll say about it, but it's really important. There are also probably 3/4 of the letters to the editor concern that this morning. But John Boyle's column, it's really worth reading, no matter what your viewpoint is.
And I thought it might be interesting this morning to just take an informal poll and raise your hand if you have been a Methodist for all of your life. 2. Okay, raise
That's
your
what I
hand.
thought.
Raise your hand if you have ever been a Baptist during your life.
Okay.
And if you have ever been a Presbyterian. And some of us have tried several.
And have you ever been a Roman Catholic in your life? Okay.
Episcopalian.
Any others?
Episcopalian.
Emily's been an Episcopalian at one time.
So get down on your knees. Get down on your knees.
For all of us who either are Methodist and need a reminder, might need a reminder, and for all of you who we are so thankful are a part of us, I'm going to begin with a very quick run through of the history of Methodism in America, because that's what brings us to the day that we're talking about and the situation that we're talking about. So this is going to be like maybe 5 minutes. All right. Methodism in America began in the late 1700s with very few people, but it organized as a church at the Christmas conference of 1784. Anybody remember where that was?
Savannah.
No. Lovely Lane Chapel in Baltimore. Now, well before that, John and Charles Wesley visited the United States. John Wesley was preaching to the coal miners in England. Francis Asbury was coming through here, literally. And Methodism got its beginnings at in-house churches, basically. It grew like the proverbial topsy. But after the 1784 conference, Methodism exploded. And by the time of the Civil War, Methodism was the largest Protestant denomination in America. Boom, just like that. Now, so the slavery split Methodism in a number of ways. The biggest split was the Methodist Episcopal Church South met in Louisville and formed in 1845. Basically split from the Methodist Church. The African Methodist Church formed about the same time. The AME Zion Church formed just after that. There was another group, the Methodists, that became the Methodist Protestant Church, which split over basically Wesley's authoritarian and his followers' following bishop's authoritarian rule and saw themselves as more democratic. And between that and the Methodist Church's formation in 1939, I didn't put that down, there were other splits. You will find Republican Methodist, you will find but in 1939, the Methodist Church formed. I was born into the Methodist Church. That was an interesting thing because the Methodist Protestant Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church South joined with the Methodist Episcopal Church to form the Methodist Church.
This happened in 39.
39. Something in a particular kind of structure, which was good and bad, came out of that because there were African Americans who were part of the Methodist Episcopal Church, including some on the Sea Islands of South Carolina, because the Methodist missionaries came in with Union troops. And so there was a Methodist Episcopal Church presence in especially South Carolina and the islands of Georgia and some other places, but they were black Methodists. Also, so what are we going to do with these black Methodists? What happened was we formed a jurisdictional structure. There were 5 major geographic jurisdictions and 1 racial jurisdiction. There was a racial jurisdiction that covered the country, the whole country. Now, when in 1972, I'm really skipping, and there's a lot of history here, including the formation of the Southern Methodist Church in Orangeburg, South Carolina, over the issue of race, and it still exists. We had another merger. There was a group of German Methodists. They were called themselves the United Brethren in Christ and the Evangelical Association, and later they merged to become what we know as EUBs, Evangelical United Brethren. They came into the United Methodist Church, that's where United comes from, in 1972, along with the United Methodist Church, which was also a merger. And at that time, we eliminated the central jurisdiction, which was the racial jurisdiction. And a few years later, because it took annual conferences time, see, there was a black conference in South Carolina, a black conference in North Carolina, there was a white conference in South Carolina, and so forth. white conference was a 1784 conference. The black conference was 1865 conference. They formed, and that was in South Carolina. They came together and we combined our churches or our structure. Also, black ministers began to be assigned to white churches and vice versa as a result of the 1972 merger. Yes?
So you may have answered your question, my question. When you said racial Methodist church, did that mean, or racial jurisdiction, that they were segregated churches?
Yes.
And then in 1972, when you said they started assigning some, that sort of...
That 1972 legally for Methodist eliminated that racial division, but it took in South Carolina about 5 years to work it out, because the black churches, the black ministers, the black lay people were very concerned about one thing. Is this going to be a merger or an absorption? Are we going to be able to maintain and take leadership? In South Carolina, this was a big deal because 40% of the Methodists in South Carolina are black. Of the United Methodist in South Carolina are black. So this was a big deal where I came from. And we had to work out, there was guaranteed there would be at least 3 black district superintendents. That's the sub-conference level structure. District superintendent is really the person who assigns your preacher, although the bishop officially does. The cabinet is all the district superintendents. It had to be at least 3. There had to be so many black heads of boards and agencies, and if there was not a black head of the board of agencies, the vice chair had to be black. I mean, it was really a tough negotiation. I'm not familiar with the course of that negotiation in North Carolina and Western North Carolina.
We had a black bishop when I first joined this church. I cannot remember his name.
Yeah.
But he visited here. I can remember seeing him sitting over there on the hill left, and my daughter, who was about 5 at the time, was the acolyte. And that was one of my favorite memories of her as a little child, standing beside that black bishop.
South Carolina's now had 2 black bishops and 2 women bishops. That also really, the women's role in the church increased with the Methodist Church in the 50s, and women bishops began to be appointed after the 72 merger. We were among the first Protestant denominations to put women into the top leadership position of the church. So that gives you a bit of a history of where we came from. Now, let's go back to where we were last Sunday. All right. Guess what? Our history of coming together and splitting apart continues. This is not a new thing. And the seeds of the formation of the alternative or the split off, I will say in this room, church that just formed in May, this last month, and I say misnamed, Global Methodist Church. Has formed as a result of several critical issues. One is probably the flashpoint one is, are gays, lesbians, transgendered folks full Methodist and full Christians? The Global Methodist Church says, the Bible says the practice of homosexuality is contrary to Christian teaching. And that was the position, and still legally is the position of the United Methodist Church. But the church has moved beyond that largely, but there's a real split. The Global Methodist Church says, no, this is anti-biblical. Folks like us, and I can say that because you voted that, say, absolutely. God is a God of all God's creation and children, and we welcome all of God's people. That is a huge division, but it's not the only. There is a very different theological understanding. It's a very different understanding of what it means when we say Holy Bible. All of us say and believe the Bible is holy text. But what that means is different for the folks that are seceding and the continuing United Methodist Church. Now, are we together so far?
No, why are they reneging against the Holy Bible?
Huh?
Why are they reneging against the Holy Bible?
No, they believe that they believe in the Bible is holy. We believe in the Bible is holy. They would say that if there is a prohibition on a major issue in the Bible, that settles it.
Do they take that as literal truth?
Almost literal. They're not quite fundamentalist.
But are they picky and choosy?
Sure. We all, in fact, pick and choose.
What keeps them from being fundamental? I mean, you said they weren't fundamental. What keeps them from being fundamental? It sounds like it's a thin line there.
What's the difference between fundamental and literal?
What keeps them from being fundamental?
They would say that every word in the Bible is not verbally inspired by God. They would say that with us. We would say the Bible contains all truth necessary for salvation. That's why the Bible's holy. Not that every word is good science, or every word of good modern science. Not that every word is self-consistent. There are things in the Bible that contradicts Jesus. And I've told you what my understanding about that is. So, but the point I'm making is that this split, or this, it's not really a split, it's a secession. Is, and I'll just say global here. You can't read it anyway. Is for theological as well as social reasons. And so the question is, how do we construct a just peace after a pretty ugly war? Yes.
A quick question back to the global thing. So is it, in essence, kind of how like the Baptists have broke off, and there's like missionary Baptists, and like it's many denominations within a larger denomination? Well,
exactly. Okay. And we've had the same thing, as I've told you about all the names. Now, I don't want to rattle on, monologue here. And so I want to stop a minute and ask you to suggest things that you feel you need to understand before we leave this morning. I don't want to assume. I know what that does. And you do too. So,
are there any good things about the Global Methodist Church? I mean,
yes.
That brings about good, what are the good things it brings about that are different?
They are passionate about missions. And they have done some really, their people have been really very active in Africa. And that has been, that now is a good thing and a bad thing. But they are passionate about missions. A particular kind of missions, but missions. And it's something that we need, that's something we can do better on. They are serious about the Bible. And in a way that I can't do it in the way they do it, but we need to be serious about the scriptures and and understanding the scriptures and using the scriptures well and not just as proof text. Now, I think they're using the scripture, the 5, maybe 6 references in the Bible to homosexuality in a totally wrong way. But they are very serious about the scriptures, and we need to be too.
Do you know if they use a particular version or translation of the scriptures that they belong?
They are right now using all of them, just like we do. And there are differences in views among their group. This is not a lockstep movement. There may be other offshoots. I expect offshoots. Once they get formed, offshoots from them. Once the 2024 General Conference occurs of the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, I wouldn't be surprised to see a very highly progressive Methodism group form. Wouldn't be surprised at all. Anyway, now, what other concerns, fuzzy things, things you've heard, what else do you want to leave here knowing that you don't know now? Yes.
I think one concern I have is how can we, not only as a congregation, but as individuals, be more proactive in just peace? What can we do that would, be more active in pursuing that?
Okay.
I didn't hear the last.
What can we
word.
do to pursue a just peace between the global, I'm assuming, the Global Methodist Church and the United Methodist Church?
Or just in general?
Well, okay. There are a bunch of options there. One thing that I am hopeful about, the United Methodist women, as usual, led the way. Now, the United Methodist Women's worldwide group is Women United in Mission. Women United in Mission. Now, you can call your local group United Methodist Women if you want to, but that's what the big one is now. And they did that for one reason, and that was to be able to include both Global Methodist and United Methodist in it. Second, the mundane but very important issues of retirement, health insurance for ministers, that kind of thing. People in both groups will continue to be involved in the same way that they always have. You're not throwing people to the wolves if they go or if they stay. Our United Methodist Committee on Relief will continue to be open to the Global Methodists if they choose. There is a tough but fair way of leaving the church. And that is good. And we could go into details, but you don't need the details right now because, one, it won't be absolutely reaffirmed until 2024. It's in the discipline now, and it remains at least there. By the way, I misquoted last week. It is 2/3 majority, 66 2/3, not 70%, will have to vote in a church to leave the United Methodist Church. And they will have to leave the United Methodist Church harmless financially. And we don't need to go into all those details.
But I would argue,
But that's,
not necessarily argue, but I would say to that end, and what we talked about last week, that is the just piece.
yes,
And especially in making the accommodations that typically a church cannot leave the United Methodist Church and take its assets with it. They remain with the conference, even if the church closes, like we'll have several churches even in our district do later this month. But in this case, it's made accommodations from a just peace perspective, even though it may not have been a just war, to allow those churches to leave.
All of this is to your question.
I think that what I'm getting from what you're saying is one of the best avenues we have, especially as women, is being actively involved in the women's group here in our church. That would be, we would be able to have a voice in what's going on with the global women.
I think that's absolutely perfect. And the women's group continue to take its historic role as being the most progressive leadership in the church, and very visible with that. Yes.
I think to also add on to your point, in talking about just peace for our everyday lives, for me, a strategy I've found that helps create just peace in a more timely fashion, is metaphorically removing myself from the situation. So if someone has wronged me, I try to take me out of the equation and see how I would react if it was done to someone else. That way my pride is taken out of the equation. And in the family I grew up in, pride is a huge part of who we are. And when you realize, how do you feel if someone else treated someone else that way, it gives that sort of cushion and barrier to be able to discuss about it without it you being the one that's been wronged and you being the one that's been neglected in that sense.
Good point. Thank you.
I admire your being able to do that.
Oh no, did I
I
say it
like
was easy? No, we take a 24-hour spell, we have our toddler fit, then we, have our moment where we realize how would we feel if this was done to someone else.
Can I mention just,
I think there are other things that really affect us. I said this last week, and I really believe this. This split, or this offshoot, this secession, does not have to affect Mars Hill in any negative way. If we continue our mission that we have decided on, and we continue to be who we proclaim we are, not having a war with the church down the street of the road that splits, but being who we are and welcoming people who may not want to split, who are part of churches that do, and making public who we are, so that there's no conclusion, no confusion as to who we are. That's part of a good just peace also. We're not going to go out and recruit people because we know that, and I'm using this as an example, and I don't know they're going to do this. Weaverville goes with global. We're not going to recruit their people, but we are going to make sure there's a home for those, and there are some in that church that don't want to be a part of that, and make our theological, our Christian basis for who we are clear. This is really, in my humble, I guess, opinion, this is an issue about the nature of God. This is not simply a social division.
I've seen other things that cause splits in the Methodist Church and have been seeing people move from one church to another. It doesn't have to be something that is an international or global true question. I know our church in Columbia split because we changed organists.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah, sometimes it's
There are
almost
always,
things.
there are always that kind of issues going on, and how we deal with people who disagree with us
right.
with the predominant leadership group. That happens in every church forever.
John had a question.
Well, just one little comment, just something to throw into the mix for people to think about. It occurs to me from the very beginnings of Christianity, which you mentioned about the women not being so afraid of change, that they're more accepting of change, hence the term progressive. And just in the spirit of reconciliation already, as we see this division happening, I'd be curious to see, and I'm basically, because I know this is we have a lot more women in this particular congregation than men. I'm curious to see if it's worth the Methodist hierarchy's people is worth to do the statistics to see what the male-female ratio is in all these different congregations. I'm curious. Men have a tendency to a little bit throughout history. They like things the way they are. I've got my comfortable couch. I don't want it moved. You know, I'm frivolous with this, but you get the idea.
I want to be clear. The Global Methodist Church, the offshoot, is not saying no women clergy or no women
and I didn't mean to
leadership.
imply
It is not doing that. In fact, there are women bishops that we know are going with them. Okay?
Okay.
Homosexuality.
But I'm just talking about congregation per congregation.
Yeah.
That'd be an
Yeah.
interesting statistic.
Yes.
I'm not saying that
Statistically,
women go to church more than men to begin with.
statistically, it's male dominated. I mean, that's the way it is.
I'm
And you're
talking
going
about
to
the
see
individual
more women taking even higher visibility leadership in the United Methodist Church as a result of this. I believe. And I think that's pretty clear if you just look at the bishops. Now, anything, we've got a few minutes if you wouldn't need it. Emily and I are going to be gone next week, and so we can't continue this next week, and I don't think we should continue it after that on this subject. But by the way, you may want to, may get a laugh out of this. Emily and I are going to the celebration of life for my ex-wife. We'll be there Saturday at her brother's house with our children and a number of people who are either her friends or were friends of and are friends of all of us. We have been able, after long struggle, to work out a just peace. But that's kind of...
I think it's very admirable. My parents, I come from a divorced home. My parents split when I was 9 months old, divorced when I was 3. And my dad has kidney disease, and he went through a really terrible bout of sickness a few years ago. And I really didn't think he was going to make it through. And Mom said, of course I'll help you plan the funeral, and of course I'll help you bury him, because that's the father. That's your father. I don't care that that's my ex-husband. That's your father.
It's always tough, and it's always bumpy. But
may I make an announcement? Is this appropriate time?
yeah,
As you know, Frida Ponger, one of the loyal members of the church here for several years, died this week. And so, several of us have been talking, and the funeral is at the, Blue Ridge. And so, instead of having a meal here at the church for the family, we thought we should take a meal to the home. And Mary Lou has been visiting Frida recently and keeping up with her. And so she and I are going to be willing to take the meal over there if you people will sign up for something that you will bring. And we'll make contact with the family hopefully today and find out for sure if they want the meal Thursday or what, and let you know. And so if you will write this Christmas pamphlet I have here, what you would be willing to bring, and I've written down some suggestions, and your phone number, so we can call you and let you know, when to have the food at the church, and then Mary Lou and I'll pick it up and take it over there.
thank you. That's wonderful. That's appropriate and wonderful. And now, has anybody not signed this thank you note, and would you like to? That's for those of you who just came in. This is a thank you note for my brother-in-law, my unilaterally adopted brother, who fixed the lights in the hall and the sanctuary this past week.
And if you would like to know what's going on next week, pick up one of these, bring it back with you on Sunday. Hopefully. This is what Margaret gave me about 2 weeks ago. So we will.
Aren't you okay with the record? If we need to do that, or is that already going on?
It's so nice.